Welcome everybody to the BRICS conference of University of São Paulo. This conference is organized by the Center for BRICS Studies of University of São Paulo. It is coordinated by the full Professor of International Law, Professor Paulo Casella. My name is Emílio Mendonça da Silva. I'm the Secretary of GEBRICS USP. And we would like firstly to express our gratitude to all of our partners in Russia, the Project Office of International Youth Cooperation, in India, the Forum for Global Studies, in South Africa, the South African BRIC Youth Association, in Brazil, CRB, in BRICS, LID China, and a special thanks to IBRA China, who is offering us the platform and the technical support. Remembering that participation can be registered by a form that will be sent in the commentaries of YouTube. I will send for you, for the audience. Thank you for the audience, all of us, all of you. And also questions can be made and sent in the commentaries for the speaker. We are having now the opening session. It will be given by Paulo Nogueira Batista, and it will be moderated by Professor Paulo Casella. I shall now give the floor to Professor Paulo Casella. Thank you, everybody. Please, Professor.
Good morning to those in São Paulo. Good afternoon, good evening for those in South Africa, India, Russia, and China. We are pleased and honored to host again the GEBRICS seminar. It is an initiative that has been maintained online during the years of COVID-19 pandemics, and we are glad to convene once more online, and thanking all the participants and the institutions just mentioned by Emílio. And we are pleased and honored to have again with us today Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr. He is a well-known and respected economist. He has been executive director of the International Monetary Fund and also vice president of the BRICS Bank, of the New Development Bank. We have the opportunity to listen to the lecture by Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr., and thereafter he is agreed to answer a few questions of the audience. As mentioned by Emílio, do please send them by the chat, and we can then organize the question and answer session closing this opening. Do please have a look in our program for the week, the lectures and seminars and panels along the week from starting now, today, until Friday afternoon. And it will be a pleasure to have you with us during the following sessions along this week. So we wish you enjoy this seminar and this week of program, and compliments to the GEBRICS group for all the effort that has been done for us to be here and work with the support of IBRA China. Dear Paulo Nogueira Batista, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Paulo Casella. I'd like to first of all thank the Center for BRICS Studies of the University of São Paulo for the opportunity you give me to give this opening speech in the BRICS conference of this year. I will try to provide a bird's eye view of the role of the BRICS in the first half of the 21st century, and especially of the role of Brazil within BRICS. As you know, perhaps I have written extensively on the BRICS, books and articles. Most recently, I have published a book with Anthem Press called The BRICS and the Financing Mechanisms They Have Created, and also the second edition of my book, O Brasil Não Cabe no Quintal de Ninguém, in English, Brazil Doesn't Fit into Anyone's Backyard. The second edition, which you have on the screen in the middle, has an extensive chapter on the BRICS. And I have also written this year a short article for China Media, CGTN, on BRICS as a role of fairness. Now, I will not repeat today what is already published in these publications, and I will not also try to summarize the evolution of the BRICS cooperation since we first started out in 2008. I will look into the future. I will try to look into the future of the BRICS, taking into account the turbulent geopolitical scenario of 2022, which, as you know, has been a matter of concern for the entire world. Now, the most remarkable fact, of course, is that 2 of the 5 BRICS, China and Russia, are in sharp antagonism with the United States, with the West more broadly. And this makes the BRICS as a group function currently in an international context, which is very, very different from the one that we had in 2008, when we first started out working as a group. First, the four large BRICS, and then subsequently South Africa joined them. Now, the second fact I would like you to keep in mind, especially those that are not Brazilians in today's audience, is that Brazil is facing an election in less than a week, which is very important, as all elections are, but which is particularly important for reasons I will not go into, but which are known. And the result of this election will have a bearing on everything that pertains to Brazil, including BRICS cooperation. I even think that it's quite a challenge for me to speak on BRICS, especially on the future of the BRICS, in a situation where we have such important elections in Brazil in a week's time. But I will try to do so. I will try to work around this difficulty, because depending on the result of the election, Brazil's participation in BRICS will have one or another character. But on the first point, on the international scenario, in different ways, there are different ways of interpreting these conflicts between Russia and the West, between China and the US. The US takes a view, China takes another view, Russia takes another view. This is quite normal. Let me tell you that succinctly, I take the view that the driving force in these antagonisms between China, Russia, and the West, and US in particular, is the reluctance, more than reluctance, I would say resistance of the West, of the US, and more broadly the West, to accept the emergence of a multipolar world, and their reluctance, resistance in fact, to face up to the relative decline in the US and in Europe, in the world. This relative decline is happening in economic, in demographic, and political terms. And this has created a situation where the US and Europe resist to the reality of this increasingly multipolar world. The Chinese have spoken of a Cold War mentality. I think the Russians have spoken of this Cold War mentality as well. And I think that there's some truth to that, a lot of truth to that. Let me give you just one figure, which is impressive. Today, the emerging and developing countries as a whole have 85% of the world's population. The developed countries, the West and a few others, have only 15%. 15. Now, of course, this decline of the US and of Europe is a slow process. The West will remain a fundamental factor in the foreseeable future of the world. However, the US and Europe have to come to terms with or face up to the fact that we have in the world a new geopolitical reality of which the BRICS are an important part. What I mean to say, friends, is that gone is the day of the 19th, 20th centuries when the West could largely dictate to the rest of the world the terms of international organization, international cooperation, international development. This is gone. Gone is also, I remind you, the unipolar, so-called unipolar moment in the 1990s, when the collapse of the Soviet Union and of the Soviet bloc created the illusion that there would be a lasting global system under US command and leadership. This is gone. It lasted very, very briefly and is now gone. what do we have now? Or perhaps what do we have in the world, emerging at least? I would say that we have something like 6 or 7 geopolitical poles, regional in nature mostly, that are in more or less advanced stages of development and consolidation. Let's go through this quite briefly. First of all, the North Atlantic pole, US, Europe, European Union, Canada, and a few other countries which are not geographically in the North Atlantic area, but which are politically part of the West. I mean, Japan, the 3rd largest economy in the world, Australia, but mostly what we have in the West, North Atlantic community, is United States on the one hand, European Union on the other, and important allies. Now, this bloc, this pole, likes to refer to itself as the international community in an abusive manner, but is really the community led by the developed world, the North Atlantic world. This is number one. Number two, you have the possibility, the emergence of a South American or Latin American, perhaps, pole, with Brazil as part of this process. No? Now, again, for example, depending on the result of the Brazilian election, the chances of a consolidation of a South American or even Latin American pole are much larger or much less likely. No? Third pole, Sub-Saharan Africa, with South Africa having an important participation. Pole number 4, emerging, Middle East and North Africa. Pole number 5, Eurasia, with Russia at its center. Pole number 6, South Asia, with India at its center. And pole number 7, East Asia, with China at its center. Now, besides these largely regional poles, we have trans-regional geopolitical arrangements, such as the BRICS. And also the North Atlantic, pole number 1, is also trans-regional because it contains not only North Atlantic powers, but also very important countries like Japan and Australia. No? Now, I submit to you that this is the world which will prevail in the next decades, in the foreseeable future. Whether our American and European friends like it or not, whether they cooperate or resist, this is an economic, demographic, and political reality which is overwhelming in its force. No? Now, you notice that when I tried to summarize these poles, the 5 BRICS are having an important role in 5 of these poles. No? So if everything goes well, there will be a pole in South America, a pole in South Asia, a pole in East Asia, a pole in Sub-Saharan Africa, a pole in Eurasia, where the BRICS will have an important role. I do not say leading role because leadership is a very problematic word to use. It may hamper efforts to coordinate in different regions of the world. But that aside, I hope, and I think that this hope is not entirely unfounded, that the BRICS will be a force for peace and fairness in the world, despite everything that is happening now. No? A force for peace and a force for sustainable development, for a new model of development that takes into account the climate challenge, you know? And especially a force for development of the poorer nations of the world, in Africa and in other continents. No? Now, there's one delicate matter which I would like to face up to, which is the fact that in the current international situation, 2 of the BRICS, Russia and China, have a very different position from the 3 others, Brazil, India, and South Africa. What I mean by that? I mean that Russia and China are in sharp antagonism to the West, to the US in particular, while Brazil, India, and South Africa may have an understanding of the position taken by China and Russia in these conflicts. We understand this, I believe, but we cannot take sides. We cannot be expected, Brazil, India, and South Africa, we cannot be expected to take sides in these conflicts. the three of us, Brazil, India, and South Africa, have very close relations to China and Russia. But we also have good and close relations with Europe and with the United States. So we will not, I believe, be led to take sides in this matter, because it is fundamentally not in the interests of our countries. Now, Russia and China, I believe, will understand this, will try as much as they can to obtain support from Brazil, from India, from South Africa in these matters. But we'll understand also that Brazil, India, and South Africa will not take sides. So the BRICS will be facing a delicate matter. No? In my view, the BRICS should maintain the original stance of the group. It's not a group that comes together to be anti-US or anti-Europe or anti-anyone. It's a group that is in favor of its members, and I hope also in favor of the development of emerging market and developing countries as a whole in the world. Now, I would like also to remind you that Brazil, it so happens, will hold the presidency of the BRICS, the rotating presidency of the BRICS in 2024. And again, depending on the result of Sunday's election, Brazil will soon be preparing itself for a role in the BRICS process, especially for the role of president of the BRICS in 2024. Now, the political economy of Brazil, the political situation of Brazil, and that holds, of course, for the other four countries, is very decisive in the evolution of the BRICS process. Brazil, in the time when I was there as director for Brazil in the International Monetary Fund, and later in Shanghai as vice president of the new development bank that the BRICS created, Brazil was a leading factor in BRICS cooperation. I can tell you. We often played the role of the dynamic factor in BRICS. Since the Temer government, and since especially the Bolsonaro government, Brazil is largely going through the motions in BRICS, has lost dynamism, has lost creativity. We never left the BRICS, as some feared, in the Temer government, in the Bolsonaro government. We continue to participate in all the meetings at all levels, but Brazil lost its shine, undoubtedly. And this led us to a situation where I believe countries are very discreet. Countries do not express these delicate views publicly or even privately. But I think Russia, China, India, and South Africa miss Brazil's activism in the BRICS. We have been replaced in this activism by the role of China, for example, which is increasingly a country that has an important weight in BRICS cooperation because of the size of the country, because it hosts the development bank of the BRICS. But a lot of BRICS initiatives are paying the price for Brazil's relative lack of dynamism since the Temer government. Now, if, for example, Lula is elected in Sunday's election, we will have as president of Brazil one of the founding fathers of the BRICS, because the BRICS started out in 2008 when Lula was Brazil's president. I venture to say that Lula has a full understanding of the way the BRICS can move forward. No? So I would not be surprised to learn. In fact, I've heard this from some of my BRICS colleagues. I would not be surprised to learn that our partners in BRICS are very anxious about the results of next Sunday's elections. Not more anxious than we Brazilians are, of course, but I think they have an interest in this. Now, of course, China, Russia, India, and South Africa, as well as Brazil, are very pragmatic in their international relations. They will deal with any government that Brazil chooses, whether it's Bolsonaro, whether it's Lula. But the possibilities of cooperation and international action will be very different. I have made this presentation, which I now attempt to close, based not only on reading, on studying as an academic, but also as an on-the-ground practitioner, because I have been involved in the BRICS process from 2008 onwards, since the creation until 2017, when I left Shanghai and came back to Brazil. So during about 10 years, a little less, I was actively involved in the construction of the BRICS and in the financial initiatives that the BRICS put forward, namely the Monetary Fund and the Development Bank. So I've been interacting with Chinese officials, Russian officials, Indian officials, South African officials, and of course, Brazilian officials for a long time in this effort to put together a cooperation mechanism that will be useful for the 5 countries, but also useful for the world. We also have this ambition. Is it excessive? I don't think it is, because you must always remember that when we speak of BRICS, we speak of the coming together of some of the largest countries in the world. The 4 original BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are part of a group of only 5 countries, only 5. The US plus the 4, they are at the same time part of the lists of the 10 largest countries in territorial terms, 10 largest countries in population terms, 10 largest countries in GDP, PPP terms. So when these 4 countries, together with South Africa, one of the most important countries in sub-Saharan Africa, when they come together to cooperate on a permanent basis since 2008, meeting regularly, including at the leaders level, twice a year, this makes the arrangement an important political factor in the world, whether other countries like it or not. Now, I attempted to give you what I called at the beginning of this talk, a bird's eye view. Now, based on my experience, I will tell you, academics overemphasize, overstate the importance of bird's eye views. They give us an illusion that we cover the whole picture when we take a bird's eye view. But also, and to close, I would like to remind you, as a practitioner in international economic affairs, I will tell you that what the bird's eye view misses is something that you can only gain in real life, which are the details of BRICS cooperation. The details where God is in the details, also the devil is in the details, as we say. And this makes the whole thing a lot different than when you come from academia or from the outside, not necessarily academia, and move into a BRICS process or any other international cooperation process. You will find inevitably that what counts very much is the way that you deal with the details. It's almost naive to think that you can, from an academic, theoretical point of view, really move forward in international cooperation. No, you need to go look at the political, the social, the economic, the cultural aspects of cooperation. And this is quite a challenge. I don't want to end on a negative note. Despite all these details, all these difficulties that we faced in constructing the BRICS process, we have been successful. The BRICS are a part and will remain a part of the international scenario. And I welcome very much the fact that the University of São Paulo has dedicated itself to creating a systematic group that studies this BRICS process from different perspectives. You have created, Professor, you have led a number of important students, young Brazilian students, to really study in detail the BRICS process, and they have already made an important contribution to the academic considerations of this matter that we will discuss today and this week. So I thank you again, Professor, and the Center for BRICS Studies for giving me the opportunity to present these initial considerations. I hand back the floor to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Paulo Nogueira Batista. As among the phrases attributed to Winston Churchill, there is the saying that a good speech should be like the mini skirt. short enough to remain interesting and long enough to cover the subject. So this was a stimulating presentation, you said. And coming from you, I could not expect otherwise than focusing on the future and focusing on the positive aspects. There is one question from Emílio regarding the possible expansion of BRICS. There are many candidates, such as Argentina and Iran. How will BRICS maintain the consensus approach with more and more members coming in from very different perspectives, in your opinion?
Well, Professor, this is a very important issue. The Chinese have for some years now been advocating the expansion of BRICS. They call it BRICS Plus. I'm not sure that this is a good idea. Let me explain why. I understand why the Chinese want this. And a lot of people outside China are persuaded that it's a good idea because this gives the possibility of increasing the weight of the BRICS in the international community. As you bring in more countries beyond the 5 original members, you might have an increasing political and economic power of the group. However, why do I say I'm not entirely sure? Because when you have a group of 5 countries, you have cohesion. It's easier to reach consensus, as Emílio insinuates in his question. When you have a larger number of countries, this formation of a consensus might become more difficult. For example, Brazil will hardly object to Argentina joining. But I can tell you that Argentina will probably, if Argentina joins the group, it will not come in alone. Russia, China, India, and South Africa would like to see neighboring countries come in as well to reinforce their position. So let's say that if Argentina comes in, you will have at least 4 other countries from other regions of the world coming in. So the number of BRICS will increase from 5 to 10. Now, 10 countries already is a larger group, difficult to maintain cohesion. And I say now another factor, carefully I say it, respectfully I say it. The 5 BRICS, especially the 4 original BRICS, are large countries in economic, demographic, territorial terms. Now, you have very few other countries in the world emerging countries in the world that have these features of size. So when you expand the BRICS, you can expect countries to join that are not as large and perhaps not as powerful as the existing members. Will they be subject to international pressure, for example, from the West, more than the 5 original? For example, will you want to bring in countries like Turkey, which are very close to us in many respects, but which are members of NATO? Would we like to bring in countries that are currently under political leaderships that are more autonomous, but may revert back to governments that are closer, perhaps too close to the United States? So all these questions are very, very decisive. Will you want to bring in countries that will reinforce, for example, the position of China in the group? The group is already lopsided by the fact that China is larger than the other 4. If China brings in countries that will join China more or less automatically in the internal discussions of the group, will this be convenient for countries like Brazil and others? No? So what I think why have the 4 other countries resisted China's inclination for expansion? Because they don't want to dilute their influence in a larger group, perhaps populated by countries that are more susceptible to Chinese influence. So it's a very difficult issue, this one of expansion of the BRICS, much more difficult than people outside the process sometimes think.
Yes, for sure. And this is something that will be further discussed in the coming years, certainly. And you see that when a group grows, like the European Union, the more members you bring in, you cover a wider area, you get bigger economically and in terms of population, but also you increase issues and problems that are more difficult to reach a majority or consensus. So this is, I do fully agree with you. This is something that on and on turns up again, but it is hard to give a definite answer. So this is Emílio again. Despite the importance of culture, politics, social and geopolitical aspects on the construction of international cooperation, how do you see the role of economics and the BRICS Bank from the point of view of a former dirigent of the bank? It is questions, these are coming from the audience. Emílio is just referring them to. What is your view, Paulo, on this?
Well, the BRICS Bank, officially named the New Development Bank, is headquartered in Shanghai. I was one of the founders of this bank, and we had a lot of hopes for this bank. These hopes remain, but to be quite frank with you, we have yet to prove the importance of this initiative. I say this frankly because the BRICS as a group have an interest, very important interest, in having this bank, this development bank, work effectively. Unfortunately, it has not so far. Partly because the choice of leadership of the bank has been unfortunate. Partly because the geopolitical difficulties of the 5 members have made the development of this bank a little difficult. Nonetheless, the bank is there. It has built a team. It has approved a number of projects in infrastructure and sustainable development. Some of these projects are quite interesting, quite innovative, and the potential for increasing its role is very much there. By the way, Professor, exactly because the formation, the political formation of BRICS is difficult to expand, we should work very much more than we have so far in expanding the number of countries that are members of the bank. The bank started out in 2015, more than 7 years ago, July 2015, when I moved to Shanghai, from Washington to Shanghai, and the other members of the administration came into, now, more than 7 years. Since then, I believe only 4 countries outside the BRICS have joined the bank. The only one in South America is Uruguay. Besides Uruguay, I believe Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Bangladesh have also joined. This is not enough. The bank was conceived by us to be a global bank. To be a global bank, it has to have a global membership. And to me, it is quite frustrating that after almost 7.5 years now, we still have a bank with the 5 original members plus 4 new members recently joined. So this shows a lack of dynamism. And this shows also what I tried to explain, the importance of details. When you look at what we did, it's amazing. We created a monetary fund of the BRICS, a development bank of the BRICS, but it's not so amazing when you look into the details and see the difficulties that we have had in making these 2 institutions, these 2 mechanisms, work effectively. So we had a lot of work to do in terms of BRICS, and I hope the new generations of Brazilians, Russians, Indians, Chinese, and South Africans will be up to the challenge of taking these initiatives and other initiatives forward.
Yes, for sure. And this is something that is a paradox to explain to those outside BRICS, that BRICS itself is not an international organization. So they do not have international legal personality, as you could say, but they have created an international organization, the New Development Bank. So this is an informal group that shows its existence and operation not only on the summit meetings, but also on more than 100 topics that the representatives of the member states convene and participate. But paradoxically enough, it is not an organization in itself, albeit having created organization as the New Development Bank. I guess this is a good way you suggest that instead of bringing new countries into the BRICS, which is informal group, you can apply for membership to the New Development Bank. So you bring in money, you bring in ideas, and you can contribute to widen the perspective and the choices that are given by the New Development Bank. This could be a good strategy to suggest to possible applicants. Are there other questions, Emílio? Feel free to mention them to Paulo Nogueira Batista yourself.
Thanks. There is no other questions coming from the audience. So, Professor, if you want to make questions.
Let me add something else. Since we're here in an academic event with the University of São Paulo, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the academics of our 5 countries can have an important role in BRICS cooperation. They have already had this. As you may know, there is within the BRICS process, there is an academic network, an academic track. I believe the University of São Paulo has probably participated in this in recent years. Now, there's a new factor which is quite important, which is that this year, 2022, under Chinese rotating presidency of the BRICS, there has been something has been created which is of very important relevance to the academic community of our 5 countries. This is a think tank network for financial issues. This was created now. It's part of the BRICS communique of the leaders recently approved under China's presidency. And this think tank network for financial issues will have to discuss crucial matters. For example, what is the role of the BRICS with respect to the reform of the international monetary system? Russians and Chinese especially have alerted us and the international community as a whole that we have an international monetary system that more than ever has shown its flaws. It's an international monetary system based largely on a single national currency, the US dollar. Now this currency, the dollar, has a very important enemy. This enemy is called the United States of America. Because the United States has used its privilege of issuing the international currency, the dominant international currency, as a weapon in political conflagrations. It has done so against Afghanistan, against Iran, against Venezuela, and more recently in a major way against Russia. So the Russians, the Chinese, and the other BRICS are very interested in discussing possibilities of international monetary cooperation, international monetary reform. Even some of us have spoken of creating a reserve currency issued by the BRICS jointly. That may be too ambitious an objective, but it's on the table. Russia has put it on the table. And the Russians very creatively, I must say, have drawn our attention to the fact that by a coincidence, the 5 currencies of the BRICS members all begin with the letter R. Real, ruble, renminbi, rupiah, and rand. So the Russians have proposed an R5 project to discuss international monetary matters. This could include, for example, deepening and multilateralizing systems of exchange between national currencies, bypassing the dollar, bypassing the political risks and the transaction costs of using the dollar as a mediating currency. Also, the BRICS last year, under India's rotating presidency, created a task force of the 5 central banks to discuss payment systems. So if you join the efforts of the central banks and the efforts of the think tanks of the BRICS, we can have a very productive discussion of the way the world should organize itself from a monetary and financial point of view. And also the BRICS have to have a long and hard look at how the institutions, how the financial mechanisms they created are working. Has the monetary arrangement done enough? Has the development bank done enough? And the new initiatives, monetary initiatives that we may create, the possibilities of cooperation are immense, but they will not fall on us automatically. We will need to have, it's not enough to speak of slogans like high quality development, high quality cooperation. The country should, on a day-to-day basis, make a systematic effort to produce this high quality, deep cooperation. And again, this is not an easy task. 5 countries, you may think, oh, well, it's only 5 countries. They can agree, certainly. We have, but it's not an easy task. A lot of details have to be faced up to. And I hope we will do so productively and effectively going forward. I hand back the floor.
Yes, thank you. Well, certainly the possibility of another international currency playing a larger role or a role comparable to the US dollar, it was expected 20 years ago when the euro was created that progressively the euro could play such a role. Maybe one of the reasons for the Brexit, the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, might be to keep the pound as an international currency and as a standard. But less than ever, these two show capable of coping with the challenge. Also not the Japanese yen or the Swiss franc. They have never reached the level of a true international currency. And this Air 5 basket could be interesting. At least you already have a common letter to earmark it is intended. This is not necessarily a physical currency. Less and less this is required. So it can be just an accounting process to set these figures in common. So this could be, you don't have to print or stamp coins. You may just have the currency as an accounting register. There are other questions that have entered our chat. Paulo, how do you think the NDB cooperating with other existing development banks, such as the Asian Development Bank, are there forms of cooperation that you could mention? And we have 2 other questions. I don't know if you prefer to answer one by one, or can I shoot the 3 and then you answer?
Let's have a look at the 3 then.
Okay. The second one, with the new development bank members, will the bank also accept their national currencies to finance new projects? And the third one, the pandemic brought a lot of economic changes worldwide. How did it impact the new development bank? Did it change any new development bank's general strategy for the next years, you think? These are the 3 so far. Thank you.
Professor, these are very important questions coming from the audience. Not easy to answer. The first one on cooperation between the new development bank and older international organizations, or even not so old ones. This is very important. From the very beginning of the bank, when I was still there, we have stressed the need for this new bank to learn from and to cooperate with existing international organizations. For example, the ADB that was mentioned, the Asian Development Bank, or the World Bank. We did that. or the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, or the African Development Bank, or Chinese national banks, such as the China Development Bank, or Brazilian banks, like, for example, the National Development Bank of Brazil. All the ones that I've just mentioned, or at least most of the ones that I have just mentioned, have in fact already engaged in cooperation with the new development bank. And this has been quite useful and fruitful. Cooperation means exchange of ideas, exchange of personnel, co-financing. For instance, in Latin America, we have the CAF, Cooperação Andina de Fomento, which is a very important regional development bank. We have cooperated, learned from also CAF. The new name of this bank is Latin American Development Bank. So the bank has always been open to cooperation and will continue to be so. No? The second question is quite crucial. It pertains to the new issues. The bank, when we conceived the bank, from the very beginning, we targeted the use of national currencies in our financing activities. Now, this is important, not only because this is part of the effort of increasing the role of other currencies besides the dollar in the world, but also for technical reasons. Because if you finance long-term in dollars, you have a currency risk for the borrower. And this, of course, affects the lending institution. So if you lend in national currencies of the member countries, you circumvent this exchange rate risk. No? Now, to do this, you need to fund yourself in national currencies. So far, the bank, unfortunately, has been quite slow. It has done some operations, some significant ones in Chinese currency, a few in South African Rand, but that's all. And we need to work harder to issue bonds in national currencies and to finance projects denominated in national currencies. This is an important factor in the monetary role of the BRICS. No? Now, the third question is the effect of COVID-19 on the bank. There's been a positive effect and a negative one. The negative one, I must say, is that the bank being in Shanghai, which has been subjected to lockdowns, very thorough, drastic lockdowns, has suffered quite a lot operationally from the fact that China is aiming at a COVID-0 policy. This has affected the working of the bank operationally. Yeah? But also, on the positive side, the bank has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic by approving a number of program loans to finance activities related to the COVID-19 in the member countries. Large program loans. I believe these were the first program loans of the bank, because the bank originally started out with project loans. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, we had fast dispersing program loans for all, if not all, most of the member countries. And this is quite an important factor. I hand back the floor to you.
Yes, we have one more question, if you agree to answer. Has the BRICS mobilized itself in any way regarding the war in Ukraine, and how it has affected the BRICS, in your opinion?
Again, a very important question, difficult to answer. How has the war in Ukraine affected the bank we created? Well, first of all, the bank, being an international organization, has suspended in temporary terms, activities with Russia, lending to Russia. Even the execution of approved projects has been suspended. This cannot last because Russia is an important member of the bank, but as a precautionary measure, this has been done. Now, the war in Ukraine goes far beyond, of course, the bank in its effects on BRICS, and it has led the BRICS to face a number of challenges. For instance, in the UN, the US and Europe have proposed a number of resolutions that affect Russia, to target Russia. what has the role of the BRICS been? Mostly the BRICS, China, India, South Africa, and Brazil have abstained or even opposed in a few cases these resolutions against Russia. India, China, and Brazil, for example, have been working together with Russia in a number of areas, despite the pressure from the US and from Western Europe to suspend or reduce interactions with Russia. In fact, the BRICS, not only the BRICS, but the BRICS in particular, have been a very important factor in weakening the idea or the attempt to isolate Russia internationally. This idea has not been working in part because the BRICS have not cooperated with this isolation of Russia, especially China. China, in fact, has come closer to Russia this year, largely because of the war in Ukraine. Again, China does not buy into fully the conflict. It tries to play a mediating role. It's not 100% beside Russia, but it's largely beside Russia. And this is because of the simple fact that the US has chosen to confront Russia and China at the same time. So this is the opposite of what Nixon and Kissinger did in the early 70s, which was to try to divide China and Russia. Now, for some reason, which I do not clearly understand, the US believes it can confront Russia and China simultaneously. It can expand NATO in the last years, and it can challenge the rising power of China. Is the US powerful enough to provoke these two other powers at the same time? Well, time will tell, but in practice, this has brought Russia and China closer as great powers. No? And look at Brazil. Brazil, even under Bolsonaro, has taken a basically neutral stance in this major conflict. No? Brazil, South Africa, India, China understand Russia's positions. They don't take sides fully in this major conflict, but they understand. They understand the fact that Russia's international security was threatened by the expansion of NATO, threatened by what was going on in Ukraine in recent years. So we're not fully on board. I think Brazil is concerned with the transgression of international borders, international national integrity that has been going on in Ukraine because of the invasion of Russia. But we do not side with NATO on this. No, because we understand that largely because of the expansion of NATO, largely because of the militarization of Ukraine, Russia was led to act. So war in Ukraine has an important effect on the whole world and on BRICS in particular, if only because one of the five is engaged in a major war, which is really not a war against Ukraine. It's a war where Ukraine is fighting by proxy, where the US and Europe are fighting by proxy, as it has been said. And this, unfortunately, will last. There are no signs of peace on the horizon.
Yes, unfortunately, this is true. There is no perspective of a short-term solution for this dilemma. And this is something which has been already dragging on more than Putin's government certainly expected when they started the invasion on February 24. And certainly the fact that they had to call for new recruits and to show the population that things are not going as fast and as easily as they might have initially expected renders the situation more delicate in Russia too. And this is something which we, seeing from the outside, we have been experiencing. So if there are no, thank you so much for all the questions you accepted to answer. It is very important to have your presence and cooperation with our initiative. And there is one more and last, I promise, if you agree to that,
Okay.
Recently, other than Iran and Argentina, Saudi Arabia also expressed interest in joining BRICS, being a strategic ally of the USA. What effects would this have on BRICS and world, given Iran and energy, in your view?
Well, you see, this is, again, a very complex political matter, no? Because Saudi Arabia is, of course, a very important country. I would very much like Saudi Arabia to join the New Development Bank, for example. But whether it will enter BRICS or not is a matter that the 5 countries have to consider collectively in a very careful manner. No? This holds for Iran as well. No? Saudi Arabia is traditionally a US ally. Iran is traditionally a US antagonist. So depending on the balance, notice this, depending on the political balance of the new members, the BRICS will take one character or another. So it's very important to consider this. Now, more broadly, the fact that Saudi Arabia, a traditional US ally, is indicating its willingness or its desire to join the BRICS is a very important factor. It's a very important symptom of the way the world is evolving. As I said in my presentation, as an increasingly multipolar world, whether our American friends like it or not, whether our European friends like it or not, this is the way the world will emerge. It will consolidate itself over the next few decades. And Saudi Arabia is certainly a very important player, as is Iran, as is Argentina, as are the 5 existing BRICS. So this is a very, very delicate political matter, which the new Brazilian government that emerges from the election, whether it's Bolsonaro, whether it's Lula, will have to carefully analyze. And I'm very happy that in Brazil we have this very important foreign service, the diplomatic corps, one of the best in the world, which will help the new government, whoever it is, to discuss in detail these new members joining or not the bank, joining or not the BRICS formation at a political level.
Yes, for sure. And as Eric Hobsbawm wrote, that these are certainly interesting times, saying that it is a very complicated scenario with several elements that we cannot fully control or fully perceive in their impacts. And this is something we will have to wait and see and live through it. So one more time, thank you so much, Paulo Nogueira Batista, for your lecture and for being a partner to our initiatives in the GEBRICS group. And this is a very good start for our week's program. And we once again welcome to all the participants. And do please follow the program of this week when the next sessions along the day today and until Friday 28. And as Paulo anticipated, we are all looking forward to the results of the elections next Sunday. And this will be our program for this Sunday evening. So thank you again so much to Ibrachina, to Emílio and the GEBRICS group, and to the participants. And Paulo, hope to see you again soon in our next events and publications and discussions. We cherish so much your participation and your insights and comments. Thank you so much. We close this opening session, and the program goes on today and until Friday this week. Compliments, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.